Hello! Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to Prog Chattery 777. We are, of course, talking about Rush, and we've made it to a major moment with 2112. That's right. So this album, of course, is Rush's fourth studio album. It was released in 1976, and it is their breakthrough album. This is the album that broke them internationally and gave them their first taste of proper success. And as such, the album is rightfully very highly regarded. A lot of Rush fans will point to this album and say, this is the definitive moment, this is definitive Rush, the ultimate Rush album. To that I disagree, a little controversial. 2112 is certainly the best album that Rush had done up to this point, and it heralds their sort of golden age of prog rock albums. But that said, I think there are better albums still to come in the Rush catalog, so it's never been my top favorite album. I think it's a little bit unbalanced on the whole. We'll talk a little more about that as the video goes on. But like I said, it is very highly regarded as a classic, which it is still a classic. It may not be my favorite, but it is a very important album, and it is a very, very good album. Highly influential. Dream Theater. Think of Dream Theater when you hear the title track to this. But yeah, a bit of history on the album, of course. The previous year, 1975, saw the release of both Fly By Night and Caress of Steel. Caress of Steel, of course, is famous for being the first time that Rush really dove headfirst into being a progressive rock band. It of course features their first 20-minute epic with Fountain of Lamneth, sidelong epic on the second side of Caress of Steel. So it's a very challenging record, and of course the record company was very displeased with it. Caress of Steel did not sell very well, unfortunately, and the band was kind of in a stage of misfortune. And the record company was putting lots of pressure on them to make a more commercial album, probably something more akin to the first Rush album, something catchy and simple, some of the blues rock stuff or whatever. And famously, Rush revolted against the record company, and for their fourth album, they opened with yet another 20-minute epic. Of course, the title track, 2112. And, of course, the record company was absolutely wrong. The record was a huge hit, and consequently, 2112 really won Rush pretty much total artistic freedom afterwards. The record company never really bothered them about being commercial, because again, they did exactly the opposite of what the record company recommended, and it led to great success. That story gets thrown around a little too loosely, sometimes. They famously revolted entirely against the record company, but a lot of people tend to forget that there is a second side to this record, and the second side of 2112 does feature much more conventional, accessible songs. So there was a bit of a compromise there. The record company still certainly didn't want another 20-minute epic, so that's their rebellion coming out. But they were at least conscientious of trying to work on simpler, more accessible songs. There's still really good songs on the second side, but I think that's actually one of the big problems with 2112, the album. A similar situation to Tarkus by ELP, where you get a sidelong suite that is just so good and is so awesome and jam-packed with things that make a band great, that a second side featuring unrelated songs will just never stand a chance. So it is very front-heavy, this album, and it leads to a bit of an unbalanced album as a whole. That's why I don't consider 2112 one of the absolute top Rush albums. Like I said, very, very good, and it's better than any of the first three albums. But they got a much better balance out of lots of the albums that came afterward. Lyrically, of course, with the title track, we switched from the sci-fi lyrics that were present in the first few albums by Neil Peart, with Neil Peart's lyrics, and we go headlong into a very cool sort of dystopian sci-fi sort of a theme. And I like that a lot more than the fantasy lyrics. I have a bit of trouble getting my head past some of the Tolkien stuff, but dystopian future, that's a pretty cool story. And that's the title track, of course. So as I talk about that, we talk about the tracks. I'll dissect the story of the title track. And the second side has I guess it's quite diverse lyrically. It also features a couple of songs with lyrics by Lifeson and Lee, Alex Lifeson and Geddy Lee. So that's quite interesting. But yeah, that whole two-sided thing that I was talking about, you know, I think that's one of the things that kind of hurts the album. And it's funny that you know, so many people tend to, you know, they mention 2112. Oh yeah, great concept album, one of the great concept albums ever. It's really not a concept album at all. It's just because the title track, the first half, is so good. You know, people base the whole album on that. And in a lot of ways, you know, the title track is what you pay your money for when you get this album, and then, you know, the second side, the songs on that are almost like a bit of a bonus. And that's just you know, how the album is. Musically, I mean, the album is so influential. You know, again, you know, Rush had firmly, you know, they'd already established on the last album that they want to be, you know, a progger. They want to be a progger band. Hugely influenced by, you know, King Crimson, Genesis, Yes, all that stuff. But what makes Rush stand out from those guys, you know, apart from the fact that they are a Canadian band and there's North American influences, it's how heavy the band is. You know, they really are, you know, metal pioneers in a lot of ways, and some of the tracks on this album in particular really highlight that heaviness. Rush is, you know, they've always been a harder rocking band than Genesis or Yes. King Crimson, that's debatable. It's probably unfair because I keep comparing them to those two bands specifically, but you know, those are the big bands of the 70s prog era in England, and you know, those are the Rush's key early influences, certainly. But it's all about that heavy rocking nature that Rush brings to it, and that's what's really influential. That's where, you know, you see bands like Primus and Dream Theater and Tool take influence from Rush. So they take that proggy thing, the intricate music, the weird time signatures, and they make it heavy and they make it rock. And that's exactly what Rush do here on this album. So yeah, let's keep the momentum flowing here. We'll start dissecting the tracks after we take a minute to appreciate the hilarious band photograph at the back. Just rocking those robes, trying to go for that dystopian future look. They were never the most fashionable band in the world, but we can forgive them because they are phenomenal musicians and they made really good albums. Still a pretty cool album cover on the whole. We're introduced to the Starman logo, which became Rush's official logo. But yeah, anyway, sidetracked. Talking about the tracks. So the album famously opens with 20 minutes of the title track, 2112. And, you know, when you compare this to The Fountain of Lamneth, the previous sidelong epic, the improvements are enormous. You know, you can tell that they've learned a lot from some of the shortcomings of the previous epic, and 2112 really delivers. I still don't think it's the best epic that Rush has ever done. Again, controversial. A lot of people will say that 2112 is, you know, the definitive epic moment for Rush, and there's a lot of valid reasoning for that argument. But I find the title track it's much more coherent and you know, well structured than The Fountain of Lamneth, but it's still a bit bitty. There's still a few sections where the song kind of cuts abruptly, and we get a few seconds of silence, and then it kind of starts up again. And I think Rush got better at creating those seeks, creating little musical seeks to link up the parts. But it is a minor criticism. The title track 2112 is very, very, very good. Particularly the opening segments. That's probably the most famous part of the title track, and that's the overture and the Temples of Syrinx section. And they've played that section almost every concert. Sometimes they play, you know, occasionally they'll play the entire 20 minutes, but if they don't play the 20 minutes, they'll usually at least do overture and Temples of Syrinx. And those very opening moments, that synth line that comes in, it's perfectly sets the stage for that futuristic world. 2112, of course, is in reference to the year 2112, which will be less than 100 years away now. That's crazy to think about. But the overture is great. It contains all of the main themes of the track, and you know, throughout those 4 minutes, it's a perfect instrumental, and it really builds the energy, and it delivers that heaviness. as well as the chops. There's lots of cool, tricky little intricate bits that they navigate their way through. But once the melody kicks in and the thing gets rocking, it is high energy stuff. Especially when you get that all those sections are just so high energy and they're utterly fantastic. And that winds its way into the Temples of Syrinx, noted by the famous vocal bit, and the meek shall inherit the earth. Then we go into the main bit of Temples of Syrinx, and that just rocks. Probably the heaviest rush had ever been up to that point. It's almost got a punk-like energy. It's frantic, it's heavy, it's in your face. Geddy's vocals are just fantastic. They're just soaring over top of the mix. Geddy's always been a controversial singer. There's a lot of people that aren't as big a fan of those high-pitched vocals. And I don't think there's anything unusual about his vocals. He's just a rock and roll singer. He's almost got that metal singer vibe to him. The only thing that makes his vocals stand out is usually that he's singing over top of kind of funny time signatures and intricate music, but he's also singing about sci-fi and fantasy and philosophy and whatnot. So it's a strange sort of juxtaposition to have rock and roll singer singing about some fantasy land and set in the year 2112. But yeah, his vocals are fantastic on Temples of Syrinx, and that is a definitive Rush moment. Overture into Temples of Syrinx is so fantastic, and it does great to set up the mood for the piece. Of course, the overture in Temples of Syrinx just sets it establishes the setting that the story takes place. Describes the year 2112, a repressed society run by the priests of the Temples of Syrinx, who control everything that's controls everything from the words you read to the songs you sing. So you kind of get this oppressive vibe of this dystopian futuristic world. And yeah, I've said it enough already, but that first little section is absolutely ace and absolutely perfect. Really, really good stuff. Hugely influential and hugely perfect. After the madness of Temples of Syrinx, we wind our way into the third part, which is Discovery. This is much more mellow, and it is at this point in which the protagonist of the story discovers a guitar, which at this point in 2112 is, of course, an ancient artifact from a previous world that is almost unknown. And he finds this guitar and he starts noodling with it and he learns how to play it and he's amazed at the beauty of the beautiful potential of music or whatever. And it's really cool. I like the beginning of Discovery where he's just noodling around on the guitar a little bit and he kind of emulates what it might sound like if someone's learning the guitar for the first time. So that's really cool. Musically, it is quite mellow, which is good. It's a nice contrast from all the madness of the opening. So that's cool. Keeps a nice little bit of mellow momentum moving towards the second section of the song, which is Presentation. This, of course, is the moment when our protagonist takes his newly discovered guitar to the priests of the Temples of Syrinx, and it is rejected. They knock it off as being some silly thing of the past that represents all that was wrong with the previous society or civilization or whatever you might want to call it. Musically, it gets quite heavy. We get some more of the themes from the overture, so that comes back really nicely. Yeah, really, really good section. Again, the momentum keeps moving forward, and it still feels cohesive. The fact that they're using bits from the overture, or the overture uses these bits, makes the whole thing much more coherent and singular, which is cool. We move on to Oracle the Dream, another more mellow section. This is one of the parts where it kind of gets cut off, and there's they could have used a little bit more arranging. The section that could use a little bit more arranging. But Oracle the Dream is cool. It's again much more mellow at this point in the story. Our protagonist is sleeping, and he's very sad that the priest rejected something that was so beautiful, this wonderful guitar that he found. Yeah, it's good stuff. Moves on to Soliloquy, so now it gets heavy once again. The dramatic moment when our protagonist is so distraught that he commits suicide, and it's very sad. And so yeah, that's kind of an unexpected moment actually in the story. But it all winds its way into the grand finale, and again we get more themes from the overture, and the whole thing ramps up to a wonderful frenzy of you know, tightly arranged, intricate, heavy, proggy stuff, and it is so fantastic. I love the very end where you get the big robot voice, you know, attention all planets of the Solar Federation, we have resumed control. Very ambiguous ending, I've always thought. Pierce said, oh no, it's supposed to be a happy ending, because, you know, a war has started, but our protagonist has started the revolution, or whatever. Something like that. But I think I like it being mysterious and ambiguous. You don't really know what it means. Who has resumed control? It's, you know, you don't know. I guess that was just Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson messing around in the studio, and you get a great sense of their wonderful nerdiness. You know, you could just see, you know, two stone kids there working on their album, Planets of the Solar Federation. Yuck, yuck, yuck. You know, and I think that's great. I mean, it's great that they put that on the album, and they put it on the song, and it wraps everything up in a really, really great way. Bottom line is, the title track, 2112, is fantastic. I don't think it's their best epic. I think there's better epics yet to come, but it is certainly a high watermark for the band, and it is a hugely influential. You know, probably, you know, at least at this point, you know, they did do a couple other really, really good albums after this, but this is surely some of the best progressive stuff coming out of North America at the time. There's a bit of an argument to be made with the Dixie Dregs, but they're kind of more fusion than prog, aren't they? But what are all these labels? They're all meaningless. But yeah, anyway, I'm getting sidetracked as I do. Let's flip the album over to side 2. The side that would never stand up to the greatness of 2112, but there's still some good songs on it. Side 2, of course, opens with A Passage to Bangkok. Now, this was never a big hit for the band, but it's certainly a fan favorite. It's a song about drugs, I believe. It's a song, well, about traveling, really, more than anything. It's talking about the old paths in which hash would be trafficked back and forth, which is kind of funny. But it is a classic riff. You know, it's quite fun. I like the da 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 da. They throw that in there. That's quite fun. But yeah, great riff. Pretty straightforward song on the whole. It's definitely not bluesy though. You know, they've definitely abandoned that blues rock thing that was so prevalent on some of the early records. So that's interesting. I really like the solo section to Passage to Bangkok as well. There's a really weird kind of cyclical rhythm that goes on under the guitar solo, which I've always thought is really, really cool. Yeah, definitely a highlight track for sure. One of the best on the second side. The next track, track 2 of side 2, track 3 overall, the Twilight Zone. Apparently, this was written and recorded in one day. Yeah, it's a cool little song. It's kind of unique for Rush, you know. It's definitely not on the heavier end of things, but it's got a nice little swing to it. You know, passages of it, you know. Of course, the lyrics are about the TV show The Twilight Zone, which is quite cool. But it's got a nice swing to it. It's nice hearing Peart do a bit of swing. You know, he's normally such a heavy, rigid kind of rock drummer, but he can swing when he wants to. There's a great juxtaposition too, because of course the Twilight Zone, the groove changes and it goes from swing to a more rigid rhythm. And we get a bit of scatting from Geddy, you know, na 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 na. You have entered the Twilight Zone. Can't think of many other examples when Geddy scat, so that's kind of cool. On the whole, you know, pretty average track, but it's unique. There's nothing else in Rush's catalog quite like Twilight Zone, so that's cool. Move on to the next track, Lessons. This track, the lyrics were written by Alex Lifeson, so that's interesting. Probably, you know, this and the next track are probably the weakest on the album. It's very funny with Lessons, because the chorus, the riffs in the chorus are very, very strong, actually. It's a rare case where I don't think they quite got the arrangement right. The actual guitar riff, you know, for the pre-chorus and chorus for the song Lessons, I think is really, really strong, but there's just something that doesn't quite jive, you know. Peart's very busy on the drums, as he always is, but I don't know if he's just not accenting, you know, the right parts of the riff to really get that riff out there or what. There's something, you know, Lessons feels like a song with a lot of potential that they just weren't quite able to muster up. But it's not bad, some nice acoustical flavorings for the verses, so it's got a nice, it's almost like a tall thing with, acoustic section with a heavy section. Yeah, it's by no means bad, but it's just, it's okay. By Rush standards, it should be better. Next track, track 5 on the album overall is Tears. This song was, lyrically was written by Geddy Lee. And, again, with Lessons, it kind of forms the weaker pair on the album. Again, it's not bad. It has a very proggy vibe to it. Kind of reminds me of like nursery crime era Genesis, very pastoral. Just a nice, simple little acoustic guitar line. There's a keyboardist that plays on that track. One of the rare moments when they have an outside member outside the trio. I'm not sure what his name is. I'm sure he's somewhere here. Oh yeah, Hugh Sim, who played keyboards on Tears. And it definitely gives the track a bit of a proggy vibe. Like I said, it reminds me of nursery crime era Genesis, but the mellotron that pops in almost kind of makes you think of maybe I Talk to the Wind by King Crimson or something like that. Nothing complicated, but it it helps to bring them into that other group of bands that was doing were doing similar things. It's okay. Finally, we get to the final track on the album, track 6 overall, Something for Nothing. Now, this is a really strong track, actually. I've always really liked Something for Nothing. Again, none of the songs on the second side have that blues vibe, that blues rock vibe. They've pretty much totally abandoned that at this point. But there's something about Something for Nothing that is very definitively Rush. It is a definitive rock song by Rush, a definitive Rush rock song. Interestingly, Geddy Lee wrote the music by himself. There's no contribution from Alex Lifeson. Interestingly enough, you wouldn't be able to tell really, because you would think Lifeson would have more to do with it, because it's got a lot of great riffs to it. What I like about Something for Nothing is the way it builds up. I love those opening arpeggiated guitar notes. They're so rich and so lush, and the song just gradually builds and builds and builds, and by the time it gets to the end, it's really rocking. Love the riff in the chorus. So Rush. That is a definitive sort of Rush thing. Lyrically, it might be a little bit preachy. The first time you hear it, almost sounds like your old man saying, "Well, boy, you never get something for nothing." Is that a new meaning to dad rock? I don't know. I don't think it's meant to be that, though. It's just it's a fact of life. You can't have freedom for free. You can't get anything for nothing. You gotta get out there and work for it. So, preachy or not, it's a good lyric. And it's a great way to finish off the second side of the album. It finishes the second side off very strong. Of course, second side's never going to be as strong as the first side, but at least it wraps up on a real high note. Passage to Bangkok starts the second side out on a really high note as well. So that's cool. I'm sure I've talked way too long at this point about this very significant album, but it's 21:12. I'm sure it's justified. It will be really cool if this video ends up being 21 minutes and 12 seconds. That would mean that I've got it closer than the band did, because they, of course, the epic 21:12 was like 20 minutes and 30 something seconds. If they were Dream Theater, they would have put 30 odd seconds of padding just so it would be 21 minutes and 12 seconds. But Dream Theater didn't exist yet at this point. Yeah, I'm getting sidetracked again, as I do. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed my near incoherent ramblings on this fantastic album, please hit a like and a subscribe. And stay tuned for more Rush. The next album I will be talking about is, of course, A Farewell to Kings, which is one of my all-time favorite Rush albums, so that'll be interesting. Stay tuned for that. Thank you once again, and you'll see me in the future.